This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Dozens killed in a fire at an overcrowded prison in Burundi. Ethiopian troops recaptured 2 key towns from Tigrayan forces. And Biden and Putin hold a video call over Ukraine. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi, and with me is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Tanzania considers rolling out its own virtual currency. And the Central Bank of Egypt in a drive to help farmers adopt modern irrigation systems. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. In our top story, at least 38 people have been killed in a prison fire in Burundi's capital, Gitega. The facility, said to have a capacity of 400, was housing over 1,500 inmates when the incident occurred. Witnesses say the blaze started at 4 a.m. local time when most of the prisoners were still asleep. Most of the victims are elderly inmates. In August, a fire broke out at the same facility. It was reportedly caused by an electrical problem. There were no casualties in the earlier incident. Meanwhile, Vice President Prosper Bazombanza visited the scene with several other ministers.
As for the damage, out of the 1,500 prisoners, we will unfortunately deplore 38 deaths, 12 of which were asphyxiated, and 26 deaths from deep burns. And we also note that 69 people are injured, 34 of whom are here under medical treatment.
The latest from Ethiopia now, where National Defense Forces say they've recaptured 2 strategic towns in the northern Amhara region. Desi and Kombolcha were taken by forces belonging to the Tigray People's Liberation Front in late October. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says this is a sign of Ethiopia's victory over the rebel forces.
The victory we have got is huge. I would like to congratulate all the people of Ethiopia. Ethiopia cannot be defeated. Ethiopia will always prevail. It will always be remembered for freedom, bravery, and victory. Our job is to pass that same story to our children. Our soldiers have demonstrated the kind of bravery beyond belief. They have marched to the captured towns days and night, hungry and thirsty, and they have paid all the sacrifice needed for us all to be here today. We are proud of our defense forces and our people. The people in Kombolcha, Kemise, and Desi have expressed their overwhelming happiness when we arrived in those cities. We now have to repeat these victories.
Well, let's bring you some analysis now on these latest developments in Ethiopia. And to discuss this, we are joined by Jan Pospisil, Head of Research at the Austrian Study Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution in Vienna. He joins us via Zoom. Thank you so much for your time this evening, Jan. Of course, a victory, as federal forces are calling it. They have secured major gains in recent fighting, reclaiming 2 strategic towns. In your view, what are some of the factors that have led to this and essentially have given the government an upper hand?
I mean, it looks like that they have now a bit of an upper hand. They've also captured Lalibela not too long ago, which is the major tourist town in the Amhara region. And I think there's several factors now contributing. TPLF and then the Tigrayan Defense Force, TDF, which is the opposing force the government is fighting, has been rather successful in pushing government forces out of Tigray and going in counter-offensive some weeks ago. But there were always questions to what extent the TPLF and the TDF especially would be able to sustain positions outside of Tigray and outside of their home territory. And there were political pressures on them to not go farther when they had the momentum on their side, but rather stop like 200 kilometers outside of Addis Ababa. What now has happened were 2 things in particular. One, President Abiy Ahmed now joining in a kind of publicity move, the armed forces, changing his suit for armed gear and joining the front lines basically to gather momentum, gather public support for the war, which is in parts of the country still there, definitely. And secondly, there is reports of a rather important role that especially war drones on the side of the Ethiopian army have played a considerable role on the battlefield in recent weeks. Although we have to say that the basically information is scarce. All information about the battlefield has to go through the government side. Here, I think in terms of the capturing of the towns, this information is secure because it has been confirmed by the TDF as well. But all other information is very much restricted at current.
Yeah, of course. So we're working with just what we can find out. But we know that the African Union, other international groups and countries around the world have been calling for talks, trying to push Ethiopia down to mediations with the TPLF. There's no sign that the Ethiopian government is interested in pursuing this route. So how do you see things evolving in the weeks to come? Do you anticipate an escalation of violence?
Yes, indeed, the situation looks rather bleak. There are several high-level mediation efforts ongoing by the African Union, who work with the former Nigerian President Obasanjo. The most significant mediation campaign seems to come from Kenya's President Kenyatta, although even Kenyatta himself has said basically parties are talking to him, but there is no middle ground. There's nothing to negotiate, because both parties still think they can win considerably on the battlefield. Again, the requests of the TPLF are basically that the humanitarian situation improves, but de facto, I think the TPLF is not going to accept Abiy remaining in power. So for Abiy, it is basically an end game now and nothing to negotiate really. We have to also say historically, in Ethiopia, there has hardly ever been a negotiated settlement. So wars have been always fought out until the very end. And I think this is something which is painting a rather bleak picture for the short and midterm future.
Well, certainly Ethiopian forces and the government seem to be very confident at this stage. And we've heard Abiy Ahmed state that this war will be finished fairly soon. But then what's likely to happen? Do you think the government will be able to maintain peace and stability if it does indeed prevail against the TPLF?
I mean, we must not forget that Abiy said in the beginning this will be a police operation against the TPLF over in a few days. It turned out to be rather different. So when I hear this again, the natural instinct would be to be rather careful to take this as is. The problem is, of course, what is at stake here, and this is a considerable risk for the whole region, is the territorial integrity of Ethiopia. Even though the TPLF is not necessarily a separatist force, what Abiy is really risking is the configuration of ethnic federalism, which held the country together since the 1990s, and it is rather difficult to dismantle that. In the beginning, his efforts basically to work with ethnic federalism to make the system modernized and more centralized were kind of welcomed by a majority, but especially now with this push against TPLF that turned out to be so violent, and also the Oromo army now joining into this, it becomes very, very difficult to see how this is playing out. So even if Abiy is to remain in power, I think he has to make considerable kind of suggestions and kind of also symbolic actions and also practical actions towards the various regions of the country.
Indeed. As you say, certainly a very high-stakes war. Thank you so much, Jan Pospisil, joining us there via Zoom from Vienna. Now, U.S. officials say the video conference taking place between Presidents Joe Biden and Russia's Vladimir Putin will see Biden warn Putin of tough economic sanctions should Russia invade Ukraine. The sanctions, according to a U.S. official, could target Russia's biggest banks and Moscow's ability to convert rubles into other currencies. The These sanctions are designed to dissuade Putin from having his troops attack its southern neighbor. On his part, Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, says Russia will state its approach to resolving the crisis with Ukraine.
We will definitely be clearly stating our approach to resolving the Ukrainian situation, to the importance of making the Kiev regime fulfill their written in black and white obligations under the Minsk set of measures. Apparently, Kiev won't listen to anyone except for the United States of America. Let's see how the talks end, but we are deeply concerned about how Kiev tries to provoke its curators.
Well, our correspondents are following developments in this story. We're now joined by Julia Chapman in Moscow and Kate Fisher in Washington, D.C. Julia, I'll start with you. Certainly a sense of cautious optimism from the Kremlin, if barely that. They already stated before the meeting that they did not expect any breakthroughs. Tell us more about this.
That's right. The Kremlin really sees this as an opportunity to get back to dialogue with the United States after putting pressure on it with this military buildup along the Ukrainian border. Of course, this has been going on for the last couple of weeks, according to U.S. intelligence, but it hasn't actually been confirmed by the Russian government, apart from saying that there are some military drills that have been carried out. But what we have been hearing from the Kremlin in no uncertain terms for the last couple of weeks has been really an insistence that it wants to discuss the European security situation. It says it wants to create a new pact on European security and wants guarantees from NATO and the US about excluding Ukraine from ever joining that bloc or for the NATO borders to ever get any closer to Russia. Now, that is not something that President Biden is in a position to guarantee by himself, nor does he appear willing to do so. And indeed, Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, says that Russia doesn't get a veto on NATO membership. But certainly getting these two leaders to the table has been a very big priority for the Kremlin, which was really pushing for this meeting. And I think even the actual fact that it is taking place is already being viewed as a success here in Moscow.
Indeed, certainly a positive sign that these two leaders are meeting. But Kate, tell us what exactly does the US hope to achieve from this meeting with Russia?
Well, US intelligence has seen a huge troop build-up on Ukraine's border with Russia, tens of thousands of troops there. So really, Joe Biden wants to get out of this meeting some kind of reassurance that that build-up will desist and that President Putin is not going to carry on and go into Ukraine as he did with Crimea back in 2014. Joe Biden has been speaking to his Western allies in Europe to try and get their support and their cooperation so that he can present a united front to Mr. Putin. Ideally, he wants to return all this to diplomacy. He wants to get away from any kind of military action, and he wants to get the Russians back to that Minsk agreement, which was the original diplomatic way that they tried to resolve their issues over Ukraine's sovereignty. So Mr. Biden will be pushing for diplomacy and trying to work out just what President Putin is trying to get out of this talks.
So diplomacy coming from the United States, but it hasn't stopped them from suggesting rather tough sanctions and other tough measures to be imposed on Russia. Julia, tell us, what solutions is Russia bringing to the table?
Well, Russia really wants an acknowledgement of its position when it comes to Ukraine, an understanding from the United States that it understands what Russia believes is its own security sphere. It worries about the incursion of NATO troops onto Ukraine, which it would see as a direct threat to Russian security. So what it's really looking for here is a kind of verbal acknowledgement of the Russian position, and that might lead to some sort of a de-escalation on the Ukraine-Russia border. Certainly there has been criticism of the idea that any sanctions could be slapped on Russia even preemptively if there is no de-escalation, no removal of these troops. The Kremlin has dismissed that idea as predictable, a predictable approach from the United States. But definitely for Russia, the main issue here was getting the West to recognize its own security interests, the Russian perspective. But of course, the West and Russia are seeing these issues from a very, very different point of view.
Indeed, and as predictable as sanctions might have been, Kate, does this constitute a significant amount of leverage for Biden?
Well, he's certainly hoping so, and that meeting is still going on. It started around 2 hours ago now, so clearly the two men do have plenty to discuss. Joe Biden is hoping that he has more leverage because of those phone calls and that support he's getting from his European allies. He spoke to the leaders of Germany, France, the UK and Italy yesterday to make sure that they were all on board, and we're told that he will speak to them all again once this meeting has concluded. That certainly gives him a certain amount of leverage in these talks with Vladimir Putin. He's also got those sanctions in his pocket. He said, the White House have said that they will be significant and severe, things like targeting members of Vladimir Putin's inner circle, and also economic sanctions that would affect the whole country by essentially cutting Russia off from the global financial system, by making sure that Russian banks couldn't be part of the international payment system. So some severe sanctions as well to use as leverage. As I say, both leaders are still talking, so we'll hopefully get some information once they finish about how much that leverage has worked.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, Kate Fisher in Washington, D.C., and Julia Chapman live with us there in Moscow. Now, a bomb has killed 4 people and wounded 20 in the southern Iraqi city of Basra on Tuesday. Local officials suspect the Islamic State were responsible for the attack. The military said the blast, located near a major hospital in the city, was caused by a motorbike rigged with explosives. Iraq declared victory over the Islamic State in December 2017, but the group continues to carry out sporadic attacks, particularly in the north. To Sudan now, the deputy head of the country's sovereign council, Lieutenant General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, has met with officials from the United Nations. Dagalo has praised the cooperation between Sudan and the United Nations in regard to the country's ongoing transition. Volker Perez, the head of the United Nations Integrated Mission to support the transition in Sudan, stressed the need to move in the direction of a legitimate democratic transition in terms of achieving free and fair elections. The meeting also touched on developments in Darfur and eastern Sudan. Officials say efforts to form joint forces are continuing, in addition to consultations with relevant parties to find solutions to the crisis in eastern Sudan. Now, meanwhile, the trial of ousted Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir that kicked off in Khartoum on Tuesday is facing a legal challenge. According to Bashir's defense team, the legal members who represent the prosecution panel were deliberately absent from court sessions to delay the case and prolong the detention of the accused. Members of the prosecution are among those affected by the military's decision to dissolve the Sovereign Council and Council of Ministers. The head of the defense team has requested the court to dismiss the accusation on the basis of law.
Imprisonment for the trial and investigation procedures, in the absence of the complainant and his lack of seriousness, should not result in harming the detainee and keeping him under accusation in detention.
For some insight on the implications of the Omar al-Bashir case, we spoke to Tembisa Fakude earlier. He's a senior research fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Particularly with the coup and the reinstatement of Abdullah Hamdok, which happened after that attempted coup in inverted commas. So it's got a lot to do with that. But I think the other important thing is the list of the people that are supposed to be taken to the ICC. We are not sure yet who's going to be on that list. But I am of the view that the previous atrocities in Sudan were perpetrated by, amongst others, the two main leaders of the current Sovereign Council, that is Mr. Hemeti, or Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, and the current general who's leading the Sovereign Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. So it's going to be very difficult to confirm a list without those two very prominent members who served with al-Bashir in the previous regime in that country. Well, Sudan, as you know, is historically had all these kind of problems, but indeed, this is the history repeating itself. But I think what they will find more difficult this time around with the persecution of al-Bashir is how are they going to deal with Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who used to be the deputy of al-Bashir all the years. One will argue that you can't persecute Bashir without including Burhan. Secondly, how are they going to deal with the strong man, which is Hemeti, or Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who is still accused of the atrocities in Darfur, for example, under the Janjaweed, which is the paramilitary army that he controls. So it's going to be a very difficult one, and it will certainly be unfair to the eyes of the Sudanese one and to the eyes of the world if they continue with the persecution of al-Bashir without taking into consideration or also indicting those two prominent individuals at the moment in the Sudanese politics.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. South Africa's president criticizes Western countries for their response to the Omicron variant discovery.
So, said the emperor, it is us today, it will be you tomorrow.
The emperor, I think, kind of built in this appreciation of what was happening in the rest of the continent.
For many, many years, he could not trust anybody else. He himself was Minister of Education.
He was really a very special, God-gifted person.
The presidents of Senegal and South Africa have condemned the isolation of southern African countries from the rest of the world following the discovery of the Omicron variant. Since South Africa made the announcement that it had found cases of the new variant, numerous countries rushed to impose travel restrictions against it and its neighbors.
Isolating a country that has detected a new variant and has been transparent is not only discriminatory but also counterproductive because it encourages others not to publish the actual results of the investigations. That is the danger. We must continue to work together in solidarity. This pandemic, which is affecting all our countries, must bring us together on the side of solidarity in our response instead of adding a new divide between rich and poor countries.
Entre pays riches et pays pauvres. When South African scientists discovered, as President Macky Sall was saying, Omicron, the new variant, they immediately took on the responsibility of informing the world, the entire world, that a new variant has come through. And what is the result? The northern countries impose a ban to punish the excellence that comes from Africa. They basically say, we will not allow you to travel around. But lo and behold, Omicron is spreading all over the world.
Now, data from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change shows that about 40% of vaccines that have arrived on the African continent have not been used. From logistics to storage, African nations are facing challenges in getting people vaccinated, even though the number of vaccines available is increasing. CGTN's Joy Kiruki Juma has the details.
This is Sekenani Health Clinic in Narok County of rural Kenya. A group of villagers have come for their COVID-19 shot.
But while we were still standing there, we were told that the vaccine was over. So I was discharged and was not interested in following it up again.
For some, it meant a long and wasted journey on foot and a day away from their cattle herds. Yet Narok County, where the clinic is located, was not short of vaccines. 115 kilometers to the nearest town, 14,000 doses were sitting in a fridge. A mix-up with county officials meant Sekenani did not get enough vaccines.
Our cool box, which is basically, this is where we store our vaccine temporarily during our vaccination days. So instead of carrying out the vaccination directly from the fridge, we have our ice packs here. We usually keep them in the fridge, and when they require the requisite temperature, we are able to stock them here, and to make sure that the vaccine is cool, and then we do the vaccination from here.
A key difficulty in administering the vaccines is community skepticism. But some residents feel they could be persuaded to get inoculated if someone came to explain in person.
I would like to get it, but there is no public sensitization on why we should get vaccinated. No one came here. We only hear that people got vaccinated. We don't know why. We only hear there is a disease.
Health experts say successful vaccination campaigns in Africa are vital in ending the pandemic globally. For the large part, Kenya has ramped up its vaccine rollout. The health ministry has employed the use of social media, television and radio adverts to promote vaccines.
The campaign is actually bearing fruit. We used to do on average 60 to 70,000 vaccinations. Now we are doing more than 100,000. If we do 100,000 vaccinations for the next 30 days, then we are confident we are going to achieve the 10 million target.
The World Health Organization says only 102 million people, that is 7.2% of a population of 1.2 billion in Africa, are fully vaccinated. This, they warn, creates vaccine inequity, which is likely to prolong the pandemic. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the Democratic Republic of Congo has announced the reinforcement of measures aimed at slowing the spread of COVID-19. The measures include the compulsory wearing of masks, social distancing, and a strict curfew. They're aimed at limiting the importation of the Omicron variant that has now been detected in several African countries. CGTN's Chris Ochamrenga sent this report from Kinshasa.
The DRC has stepped up measures to control the spread of COVID-19. The country's COVID-19 National Task Force has announced the compulsory wearing of masks, hand washing, and limited public gatherings to 50 people. The announcement comes barely 2 weeks after scientists detected the Omicron variant in South Africa. The DRC Health Ministry has not detected the variant in the country, but some people are happy that the government plans to protect them.
I think the government's health measures are a good idea because they're intended to protect us from the disease. If we follow them, we will be preventing deaths in our country.
Those regulations are not bad because they will help protect us from COVID-19. The president must have good reasons for introducing them at this moment. We just have to respect them.
Some health workers say the government's reinforcement of health regulations should be accompanied by payment of wages for those in the sector.
It's a good move, but the government should also pay health workers their allowances to motivate them to work.
Congolese authorities have recorded more than 1,100 COVID-19 deaths since March 2020. They've also recorded a slight increase in case numbers in the capital city. The health guidelines aimed at preventing the spread of COVID-19 in the DRC have proved difficult to enforce, especially in the capital, Kinshasa, because many people have long neglected mask wearing and hand washing in public places. Vaccine hesitancy and misinformation is still widespread, despite efforts by the government and international organizations to counter it. And that has ranked the DRC among the least vaccinated countries in the world. According to the World Health Organization, only 56,000 people have been fully vaccinated out of its population of 90 million. The government plans to deploy the police to enforce the latest health measures in a bid to curb the spread of the disease and stop the importation of the Omicron variant. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Right, let's go to South Sudan now, where the Chinese embassy has launched the second phase of a China-aided technical cooperation project. It aims to support the development of education in the East African country. South Sudan has one of the lowest literacy rates in the world, with only 37% of the population able to read and write. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The cooperation includes taking teachers from South Sudan to China for training. China will also print textbooks for South Sudan's primary and secondary schools. South Sudan's government says expanding the existing cooperation with Beijing will increase education opportunities in the East African nation.
I believe that this technical cooperation in education will bring the Chinese experience, which could be merged into our developing concept for the development for the educational innovation.
The Chinese government is promising to continue providing assistance to South Sudan to help the country develop its education sector.
In the 10 years of our diplomatic relationship, the education sector has always been a priority area for our exchange and cooperation. China has supported the construction of a number of primary and secondary schools in South Sudan, trained over 5,000 professionals in various sectors, and provided hundreds of scholarships for students to study in China.
Schools in South Sudan remain open despite the challenges posed by COVID-19. The government says it's restructuring the education sector.
Actually, implementation has already begun. For example, a review of curriculum materials is underway, and teaching of Chinese language is taking place at Juba Day Secondary School.
China is also providing face masks to help keep schools in South Sudan open. China says it is investing about $20 million for the Phase 2 Technical Cooperation Program to support development of education in the East African nation. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thanks, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Tanzania considers rolling out its own virtual currency. And the Central Bank of Egypt in a drive to help farmers adopt modern irrigation systems.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in South Africa. Royal Dutch Shell faces a fresh legal challenge to its planned seismic survey of South Africa's eastern coastline. Now, a group called Sustaining the Wild Coast filed a case last week arguing that besides potentially damaging the environment and disrupting local communities' ability to make a living, Shell doesn't have the appropriate permits. Now, the group also said that Shell's exploration for oil and gas contradicts the country's drive to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels. Now, the case comes after a South African High Court on Friday dismissed a request for an interdict from another group, including Greenpeace. Shell, in a statement, maintains that it takes the concerns of local communities into account and is adopting international standards to mitigate the environmental impact of its activities. In addition to the legal action, Shell has faced countrywide protests over its plans in South Africa and a call for a boycott of its gas stations. And heading to Tanzania now, the Central Bank of Tanzania is planning to introduce a central bank digital currency, or a CBDC. That's after several countries on the African continent announced similar initiatives. If successful, Tanzania will be among a growing list of countries who are currently exploring the rollout of digital currencies. Here's CGTN's Isaac Lukando with more.
Tanzania's currency, the shilling, has been coin and paper-based since 1966. Following in the footsteps of Nigeria, Tanzania could soon have a digital version of its currency that will operate alongside the physical one.
The Central Bank of Tanzania has already begun preparations for the possibility of having its own digital currency. The preparations involve building the capacity of experts, increasing awareness of stakeholders, and researching.
With a growing number of Tanzanians trading in cryptocurrencies, along with the government's desire to embrace them, experts believe the introduction of a digital currency will help the government answer critical questions on cryptocurrency.
How to regulate cryptocurrency, how to deal with the technology, how to help even those guys who are trading cryptocurrency, even startups in Tanzania based on blockchain. How are they going to help them?
According to the International Monetary Fund, there are some 110 countries that are at some stage of developing their own digital currency. At least 7 countries, including Nigeria, have already launched theirs. With $7.8 billion worth of mobile money transactions monthly, the central bank sees digital currency as a natural evolution in its quest to embrace an increasingly digital world. It believes that having a digital currency will not only allow more Tanzanians to access financial services, but will also be cost-effective and will allow for easier tracking. Despite the benefits, experts warn that millions of digitally illiterate citizens could hinder the success of the currency.
A lot of people in Tanzania, particularly, they have got no access of internet. And you can see that this technology need internet, need some sort of skills, need guys who are somehow literate. So you can see that it is a challenge.
It is not clear when a rollout of the digital currency can be expected, but if all works out, using a digital currency could be a new normal for Tanzanians in the not-too-distant future. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Meanwhile, the Central Bank of Egypt has allocated about $3.5 billion to help its farmers switch to modern irrigation systems that they hope will be more water efficient. Yasser Hakim takes a closer look at this initiative and, of course, its benefits.
Egypt is a country suffering from acute water poverty levels. That's why the government is pushing to apply methods that will make optimum use of limited water resources. This includes introducing water-efficient irrigation systems. Saber Salah, a farmer, had learnt of the system from a friend and applied it on his vegetables and strawberry crops.
Before, I used the flood irrigation, which was harmful because it creates fungus in the crop, so I had to use more fertilizer, more pesticides, and more workers on the land. The drip irrigation saves all this and is water efficient because you control the amount used rather than flooding the land and wasting a lot of water.
Saber says it's essential to expand this system nationwide.
Farmers want to install this system, but they need support. The farmer doesn't have the ability. It costs 10 to 12,000 Egyptian pounds for each fedan, plus other costs that will incur thousands per more fedan. Banks take so long with complicated and tough conditions for a loan. It takes months. Farmers needed another way of funding.
The central bank, along with the Ministry of Agriculture, have intervened with a $3.5 billion fund to help farmers switch to the modern irrigation system. Dr. Ala Azzouz is leading this ambitious project.
This is the first time zero-interest loans are offered to farmers. They can also repay the loan for up to 10 years, which doesn't place any burden on the farmer's income. The protocol is about 3 forms of cooperation. First is to fund the infrastructure needed to install the new system. Second is to secure financing and to install the new irrigation systems. The third is providing all kinds of assistance, financial and technical, free of charge, to teach and help the farmers how to apply and operate the modern irrigation systems.
According to Dr. Ala, besides being water efficient, the new drip irrigation network will increase production per fedan for the farmer, lower the cost for cultivating a piece of land, reduces the workforce, and that translates into more profits for the farmers. But it is also in line with other strategies set by the North African country.
The water consumption differs with each crop, but the average amount of water saved in the modern irrigation system is about 30%, so our water consumption drops by 30%. The saved water will also be used to benefit the whole country. It will be used to irrigate new pieces of land and establish large agricultural projects to help us with our main goal of achieving food security.
The government announced that the $3.5 billion allocated for the new system will cover 4 million fedans out of the country's 10.5 million cultivated fedans of land. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And in Kenya, families and business owners may now be at risk of a fine of 20,000 Kenya shillings, that's just about $200, or 6 months in jail for failure to separate degradable and non-degradable garbage. Now, a 2021 Sustainable Waste Management Bill, already approved by a parliamentary committee, will make it compulsory to separate garbage into organic, dry and special waste ahead of collection from homes and businesses by licensed garbage firms. Now, Kenya's National Assembly Committee on Environment inserted the new clause that compels households to store garbage in 3 bins of green, yellow and blue. If adopted, Kenya will join nations in the West that levy fines for putting waste in the wrong bins or putting bins out on the wrong day. And data from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development shows that there are an estimated 189 operating special economic zones in Africa. Most of these are well established and are present in about 47 of the 54 countries. Well, CGTN's Angelo Coppola looks at Angola's bet on these zones for economic revival from the capital, Luanda.
The well-established Luanda-Bengu Special Economic Zone is experiencing a resurgence, and it's based on getting a few fundamentals right.
The infrastructure is very nice. The energy is quite stable. There is water here. The roads are nice. Security is also good, so a lot of benefit compared to any other place you can find in Luanda, in Angola, yes.
Keeping existing business owners happy is important, but so is the search for new investments.
We now need to expand by bringing in new quality FDI from other geographies. Of course, those ones needs to be aligned with the Angolan government diversification program. As you see, Angola was very depending on oil. Now we want to move away from that dependence.
COVID has had a significant impact on investment decisions around the world, and yet some businesses have continued operating and in some cases expanding.
We're going to expand to some other new areas here in this place as well. We're going to build some warehouses in the backside. We have some land available. The packaging business will keep growing in the country as the new manufacturing is coming up. So we expect to grow in that area. On the plastic packaging, the one-way, the boxes for the so many industries are coming up here. So expecting to grow in that in that area.
Like any business, the special economic zone needs to attract investments. It's got to be self-sufficient.
Now we are ready to grow in a sustainable way. Of course, it's very important to grow in a sustainable way. And this is why we are also having in place a strategic plan and a bankable business plan, which is key to find finance.
Entrepreneurs find a way to make a business niche for themselves. Those that are successful create their own niches. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Luanda, Angola.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, South Africa's economy shrinks 1.5% in the third quarter of 2021. We'll take a look at its prospects and, of course, those numbers. All that coming up top of the hour. From now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. We will take a short break, but here's what's still ahead on the program. Tanzania's 60-year anniversary becomes the central theme of Swahili Fashion Week.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Tanzania's 60-year independence anniversary was the central theme of the 14th edition of Swahili Fashion Week. It was held in the country's commercial capital of Dar es Salaam. The three-day extravaganza brought together fashion and accessory designers from the East and Central Africa region and beyond. CGTN's Daniel Kijo tells us more.
For the last 14 of Tanzania's 60 years of independence, the Swahili Fashion Week has strived to be the center of African fashion. This year, 92 designers from Swahili-speaking countries and beyond are showcasing their talent. Organizers argue the COVID-19 pandemic has allowed the event to become the largest fashion show in Africa.
There are virtual events, but with limited number of designers, showcases in other countries from 5 days to 2 days. So that's why this gave us an opportunity to become the biggest because of COVID, because we did not have lockdown.
At this event, 64 local designers, 10 emerging designers and 18 foreign ones are showcasing and marketing their work. Many of them believe the event is critical for their growth as designers.
It's really good and important for designers to have an opportunity to showcase their work in a professional setting, because then they get to hone and fine-tune their work and to sort of step back and see it outside of themselves.
Top designers in different categories are also being awarded for their work. Organizers hope that recognition will help advance their careers and help translate their art into incomes. Designers from the US, Oman, Spain and Italy are joining designers from East and Central Africa in showcasing their work for an international audience. Those in attendance at the event say they see the show's impact.
Colors, how you mix in special designers, we don't don't fear to experiment with combinations of colors, we don't follow like strictly rules of fashion industry.
This show opens up the world for models and designers because it's the big show that's watched all over Africa. It becomes easier. If you have something nice, it's the place to sell it. It's a show that really helps even those who are starting off today.
Despite the strides made over many years, organizers feel more needs to be done to gain the kind of international recognition they desire. They hope that with each year of staging the show, they get closer to making African fashion truly global. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
And coming up in your sports news. Tunisia reached the last 8 of the FIFA Arab Cup after a 1-0 win over United Arab Emirates.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.